Going back to the story, I see what the boys who are out hunting and then meet these two refugee children. That's uMunthu. You meet somebody.
Ethos that
Exactly. Yeah. Somebody who is homeless and they're in trouble, you want to help out. When they are brought home and they meet the chief, what does the chief say? You're welcome. You can stay here for as long as you like. That's uMunthu. They make food for them and they play with other kids. They just integrate. So that's what uMunthu as an ideal means. And I think it's been lost, a lot of it, because of all kinds of forces. Nowadays, people have to fight for resources, have to fight for money, have to fight for space. So that culture is disappearing. And I think that especially for Malawian educators, that is a major responsibility to go back to recapture those values and make them part of the education system. And the thing with uMunthu is that it's not just Malawian or African. I see it here all the time. I see here people helping one another. There are many, many times that I've been in trouble, and somebody comes and says, "Looks like you need help." And they come. A car died on me the other day. I was trying to go to a grocery store, and it died. And it died right in the middle of the road, and I couldn't move it off the road. And somebody came and said, "How can we help?" And they went on the phone and they called my insurance company, and they came. Other people who were traveling on the road stopped and came and helped to push the car off the road. And I said, "This is uMunthu." So it's everywhere. We all have it. Only that, I think, because our lives are dictated by economic forces, we many times end up focusing on how to make money and how to maybe solve some of the day-to-day problems. But the bigger picture of uMunthu, I think, is still there, and we need to bring it out. And I think we can solve some problems using concepts like those. For me, the thrust of the story, the central part of the story, was the disruption of their lives. This family from Mozambique, they had to leave because the war had come too close to them. So they ended up leaving. And they left in the middle of the night. And they were crossing the border. And they went through a thick forest at night. And it was very dangerous. And they are almost attacked by wild animals because it's in a forest. And they end up separating. The children go one way, the parents go another way, and they don't see each other again for a long, long time. So that part I made up, but I had to come up with a story. I had to put in drama. When you're writing, one of the things that you want to do is to create drama, to create suspense, create conditions that will make your readers interested in reading. And many times these things happen in real life. So you are not creating anything out of the ordinary. You are just describing things that happen in ordinary life. When you read the story, it begins with the boys hunting, but that was one of the last things I did in the story. When I began writing the story, the main part for me was describing this escape from Mozambique and the trouble in the forest and then being rescued in Malawi. I was trying to portray young Malawians doing what they like to do. I was trying to portray cultural values that Malawians hold. Many Malawians believe that all human beings are one people, and that problems come because of our humanness. We can't help having problems, but we have to work toward solving those problems. So the war in Mozambique happened because human beings like to do that. But we can always improve things. And so the Malawians are willing to welcome these children who have been lost. They're welcomed. If you notice that the first thing that they see when they meet these young children, the boy and the girl, is to ask them what they're doing there and to tell them that they can go home, that they can be given a home, and they will have food, and they will be given security. And when they get home, the parents of the the Malawian boys welcome these two children because they believe that we are all human beings. And if any one human being is suffering, it is our responsibility to help them, to find food for them, to give them a home, to give them land, to give them the resources that they need. It's a value that in Malawian culture is called uMunthu. uMunthu is taken from the word muntu. Any human being in my first language, Chichewa, is muntu. So I am a muntu. You are muntu. You are muntu. And everyone is muntu. But the thing that makes us human is uMunthu. And uMunthu are the qualities that bring about peace in the world, that make all of us feel responsible for one another, to help one another. And that's why at the end of the story, there is joy. The parents and the children are reunited, and then that's where the story ends. But if you think of the main character in the book, Chikwa, when I was thinking of the character Chikwa, I was thinking of a nephew of mine. And this nephew of mine, his name is Mucheliwa. He was, when I taught in this little school, he was one of my students. So I'd walk from home with him, go to school, and after school, I would also meet him. He was clever, he was very bright, and he was energetic. So I put all those qualities of Muche into Chikwa, the character. So with this story, it took me, I think, a month to just think about it, create the characters and create the plot, the beginning and maybe the end. But the actual writing, I did it in one night. So I sat in one night, I came back from work around 6. I write poetry in addition to writing stories. Maybe the difference for me between the poetry and the fiction is that in the fiction, I tend to develop things a bit more because I can describe a character, I can do a plot, and I can have beginnings and endings and suspense and drama. Whereas in the poetry, I want to condense things and maybe have just a page, but full of things. So the poetry is a bit harder to write than the fiction. And the poetry also takes, I think, longer for me to think about and come up with verse. But in the poetry is where I am able to express my appreciation for the beauty of language. And so the beauty of nature, the beauty of human beings, and the beauty of life. The first time I started taking poetry very seriously was when I began realizing that there were things that you couldn't talk about with other people on a day-to-day basis. The Malawi I grew up in was a Malawi which was not free. It was a Malawi which had a political system which was quite repressive. There were times when you could not, for example,
Okay, Heather, maybe you could start us out by talking about how you use Fleeing the War in your class this week.
On Monday, at 2 different times during the day, we sat down together and read it. The first half in the morning, and then we came back in the afternoon and finished it up. And as soon as we were done reading it, we brainstormed just some questions that we had together about the content of the book, about the writing of the book, about the author of the book, and just had some conversations about what our immediate thoughts were of it. And then the next day, we focused a little bit more on the idea of injustices and what that means and examples of it and if they've ever been impacted by what they felt was an injustice. And from there, they just went off and did some writing in their notebooks, some focusing around poetry. And so they spent half an hour, 45 minutes with a partner just to have conversations and then write, and then have some conversations and then write. And just to get their ideas flowing and to talk through some things they were thinking and then have some opportunities to write. And we did a little sharing that after that in circle if anyone wanted to share what they were thinking or share lines from their poems. And then a couple of days later, we talked a little bit more about immigration specifically and refugees specifically. And I have several immigrants in my classroom, and they shared some experiences and wrote about some experiences. And if they weren't an immigrant themselves, they thought about what it might feel like when they moved here, or if you were forced to leave your country, what that might be like. And so they did some writing and some more sharing for those who wanted to. And we talked a little bit more about what, when they were writing, we had studied poetry in the beginning of the year. And since then, some of them have continued in their notebooks, but some of them haven't. So we had noticed that some of them were, as they were reading and they were sounding like poetry, but when you looked at it, it didn't look like poetry, it looked like a story. And so we did a little talking about what poetry looks like, what poetry sounds like, and they got really then into changing the way their poem sounded based on the way they looked. So it was just an interesting sidebar that they got off on. I think from here it could be interesting to do a deeper investigation into refugees and into life of a refugee and what that might be like. And in different areas of the world where there are lots of refugees, where they go, how the country accepts them, or countries accept refugees, and could be a neat investigation.
Well, I think what you're speaking to also points to the kind of the curricular challenge and possibility of using a book like this, and that is there's really rich opportunities to explore the content of this story in the context of Malawi and context of the refugee experience with Mozambique. And you're also pointing to this almost universal implications for ways of thinking about the refugee experience, and with concepts like you're sharing uMunthu that help us understand this experience.
Yes.
So there's really rich opportunities for social studies content here in terms of learning about Africa and learning about Malawi.
Yeah.
And there's, I think you were pointing to, Heather, all these language arts connections or literacy connections with writing, going through the revision process and talking about the choices you make as an author.
Well, and writing for a purpose.
And writing for a particular
having that
purpose.
purpose in mind, and that the idea of what's at the end that we're looking for, I thought was such an important piece for them to hear, that we're not just writing for in our notebooks because my teacher told me to.
Mm-hmm.
That there's a bigger purpose of educating others. And
I had a question about what we thought would be the most challenging aspects of using a book like this. We may have talked about it a little bit, but is there something that, in your experience this past week, Heather, in using this book or other things?
I was worried in the beginning. It's a long.
What you're seeing on page 10 is, if you get a chance, go back to the map, the map of Africa, and go to Malawi, and you will see this is a border district. Some of the places where Malawi shares a border with Mozambique. So in those places, actually, it's the road, the tarmac road, the highway that divides the two countries. So when you're driving on the highway is on the Malawi side. As soon as you step off the highway, you are in Mozambique. So if you look at what's happening there are houses and little huts burning. This is what happened in the Mozambican war. Huts and houses and buildings were burned and damaged. So what these people have done is they have fled Mozambique and they have crossed into Malawi. So they're carrying things that because for most of them, they don't own cars, and there isn't transportation where they can jump on a bus and go to Malawi to flee the war. So they have to walk on foot. And so the only way they can bring some of their belongings with them is to carry them on their heads. But this is common in Malawi. Most Malawians, especially the women, like to carry things on their head. Maybe when they're coming back from the farm, the field, if they can't afford cars or a truck on the farm, many of them can't afford those things. So instead, they carry things on their heads and bring them home. The men normally carry things on their shoulder, so you carry something on the shoulder. The women like to balance things on their head. what you're seeing on page 10 is, if you get a chance, go back to the map, the map of Africa, and go to Malawi, and you will see this is a border district. Some of the places where Malawi shares a border with Mozambique. So in those places, actually, it's the road, the tarmac road, the highway, that divides the two countries. So when you're driving on the highway is on the Malawi side. As soon as you step off the highway, you are in Mozambique. So if you look at what's happening there, there are houses and little huts burning. This is what happened in the Mozambican War. Huts and houses and buildings were burned and damaged. So what these people have done is they have fled Mozambique and they have crossed into Malawi. So they're carrying things that because for most of them, they don't own cars, and there isn't transportation where they can jump on a bus and go to Malawi to flee the war. So they have to walk on foot. And so the only way they can bring some of their belongings with them is to carry them on their heads. But this is common in Malawi. Most Malawians, especially the women, like to carry things on their head. Maybe when they're coming back from the farm, the field, if they can't afford cars or a truck on the farm, many of them can't afford those things. So instead, they carry things on their heads and bring them home. The men normally carry things on their shoulder, so you carry something on the shoulder. The women like to balance things on their head. Achimwene apita kuteba ukagula galamu, achimwene apita kuteba ukagula galamu. Yo imba wiri opanda miromo, yo imba wiri opanda miromo. Malawi is a tiny country in Southeast Africa, and it has up to 12 million people, I think. I grew up in southern Malawi, and then I became a teacher, and I taught in the central region. So I taught in a little school called Chikande Primary School. And after about a year or so, I started noticing that we used to have a group of visitors coming to the school, mostly in the afternoons, especially on Mondays, every other Monday. So I would see men and women come to the school after we had done teaching, and then they would go back. And they would carry things with them on their heads and on their shoulders, in their bags, and they would walk long distances going back home. Sometimes I would find them resting maybe under a tree or by the roadside or under a shop, maybe having a soft drink or having water or just resting. And one day I wanted to ask them questions. I wanted to ask them who they were and where they're coming from, because they weren't necessarily coming from the village in which the school was. So I sat down with them and I started asking them questions. And I learned that they were coming from Mozambique. They had fled war from Mozambique, and they had come to Malawi. And then I started learning more about the Mozambican War. We knew about the Mozambican War because in Malawi, it was on the radio and it was in the newspapers. When you have a chance to look at the maps, you will see that Malawi is surrounded by Mozambique. Mozambique has got a shape like a Y, and Malawi is swallowed in half. So on the southwestern side of Malawi, there is Mozambique, and on the southeastern side, there is also Mozambique, and all the southern part of Malawi. So what happened was that in Mozambique, revising is one of the most important things, because I had trouble ending the book. I didn't know where it was going to end. So when I did my first draft, I think it ended with the two children, the young boy and the girl, Jose and Rosa, being rescued, being found by the Malawians. But I didn't know what to do next, so how would I end it? In revising it, I kept thinking about what would be a logical step for the book. when do they meet the parents ever? Because at one point I was thinking, maybe they won't meet them at all. Maybe that's it. They'll never meet again. So in going back to the story and thinking about what was important and maybe the messages that I wanted to be taken from the story, that's what gave me the ending. So for me, the revision process involves sometimes extending the story, changing maybe the names of the characters. When I started, I didn't know what names I wanted to give my characters. So when I was revising, I thought, maybe I want names that mean something in Malawi, in the Malawian languages. So so if you look at some of the names, they mean things. So for example, the name of the forest is Mdima. Mdima in Chichewa means darkness. So this is a forest that's full of darkness. It's very dark in the forest. The name of the village is Malire. Malire in Chichewa means border or boundary. So this was a village which shared a boundary with another country. So all those decisions came during the revision process. And that's when I also decided what kind of introduction I was going to have. So if you look at the opening part of the story, it starts with the boys hunting. Because the hunt, when they meet the two children, comes much later in the story. That was the beginning of the story when I started writing it. But when I went to do the revision, I decided to start with yet another hunting expedition when they come home with guabe and other animals. And then comes the next hunting when they meet the two children. So the revision takes that form. It takes the form of organizing the essay, thinking of the beginning and the introduction. I never don't begin with the introduction or the ending. I begin with the middle part, the things that I know best. So I knew best the stories that I had heard from the Mozambicans and the character that I wanted to give to the main character in the story. Those came first. There are places in the story where I also found it useful to add songs. Those came also during the revision process because the songs add to the language. I am interested in language, in the beauty of language, and songs are part of that beauty. I will read you a poem that I wrote maybe in 94, I think, 94, 95, I don't remember when. But I used to live in a house. I think it was a complex of 6 apartments, but they were big apartments. Big, maybe as big as what you call a condo here, but there were 6 of them. So every morning, I used to see students and elderly people leave their houses and to go to the other side, especially to go to school, get to school, they needed to go through a graveyard. This was unusual because normally graveyards are sacred places. I will read you a poem that I wrote maybe in 94, I think, 94, 95, I don't remember when. But I used to live in a house. I think it was a complex of 6 apartments, but they were big apartments. Big, maybe as big as what you call a condo here, but there were 6 of them. So every morning, I used to see students and elderly people leave their houses and to go to the other side, especially to go to school, get to school, they needed to go through a graveyard. This was unusual because normally graveyards are sacred places.